Good morning, Chair Neguse, Ranking Member Fulcher, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Fawn Sharp. I serve as Vice President of the Quinault Indian Nation and President of the National Congress of American Indians. On behalf of NCAI, thank you for this opportunity to provide testimony on H.R. 108 and H.R. 109. NCAI fully supports these pieces of legislation as viable ways to increase the protection and parity for tribal nations' sacred and cultural lands. The lands which make up the United States is carved from the historic territories of our tribal nations. And from these land takings exchanges came a unique legal relationship with the federal government, one rooted in treaty rights and the federal trust responsibility. As the nation-to-nation relationship has evolved over time, it's been particularly important and incumbent upon the federal government to protect tribal cultural heritage by preserving American Indian and Alaska Native sacred places, objects, and cultural landscapes. As Native people, we maintain meaningful relationships, religious, cultural, and social connections to our ancestral and historic homelands, including to our cultural and sacred landscapes, regardless of their current status. Both H.R. 108 and H.R. 109 would implement important protections for our sacred and cultural areas and fulfill numerous responsibilities to protect our religious freedoms. NCAI has two resolutions which call upon the federal government to increase protections for our cultural heritage by securing our rights to our culturally relevant landscapes, calling on Congress to fix the gaps in federal law that leave tribal nations without a meaningful voice and a practical path forward to protect and manage our ancestral landscapes. They also call for tribal nations to have the first opportunity to purchase federal lands they have had a historical relationship when it comes time for disposal or transfer. H.R. 108, the Advancing Tribal Parity on Public Lands Act, would not only ensure that tribal nations have parity with other governments, but that our cultural and religious observances are offered the respect that they so deserve. This bill builds tribal consideration into the federal land acquisition and alienation process, empowering tribal nations with the right of first refusal for their lands. Federal agencies will also be required to consider the presence of cultural sites and the fulfillment of treaty obligations when considering land acquisitions, and prohibits the sale of public lands containing a tribal cultural site. NCAI supports 8108 because the right of land repatriation and protection is at the heart of NCAI. Tribal leaders across the country created NCAI in response to federal termination policies, which threatened tribal sovereignty, our governments, and our territories. This was not simply a matter of securing control or governance, but to protect our sacred and ancestral connections to our land. For these lands, which remain under federal stewardship, our cultural landscapes still require additional protections. Oftentimes, the protection of and access to these sites were guaranteed under treaties, which were never upheld. While Congress has formally recognized the need to protect both American Indian and Alaska religious activities and nationally cultural relevant places, such as in the American Indian Religious Freedom Act and in the National Historic Preservation Act, these laws still leave a gap in the protection of our tribal sacred places. That is why H.R. 8109 is so important. This bill would preserve tribal nations, that we have a vested interest in creating tribal cultural area systems. We as nations would be able to recommend sections of public land to the system and be empowered to manage these cultural sites. We have been protecting and managing our lands for millennia. H.R. 8109 will honor and uphold many of the promises that have been broken. There is merely and rarely a meaningful way to uphold tribal sovereignty than by ensuring tribal nations have a voice in the decisions that will affect our cultural, historical, and sacred landscapes. NCAI strongly supports these bills as both offer the much-needed parity we deserve as sovereign tribal nations. As Congress works to restore the promises made to tribal nations so long ago, we urge you to pass H.R. 8018 and 8009 and secure protections for our lands and our freedoms. Thank you.